tonight. Joining us, Yaakov Lappin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Jewish News Syndicate, Dimitri, Diliani, member of the Fatah Revolutionary Council, and Hananya, Naftali, political pundit. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for joining us this evening. And our main topic for today, the deadly twin terror attacks in Jerusalem. Are we witnessing a third Intifada? So without further ado, let's begin with a quick fire round of 30 seconds each. Are we witnessing a third Intifada? Mr. Yaakov Lappin, take the lead, please.
It depends on how you define an Intifada. The so-called classical definition of Intifada is widespread violence over a wide geographical area, and by that definition, we are not facing a new Intifada right now, but we could in the future. But there are other ways of looking at it, and we're certainly facing a prolonged terrorism wave.
Terrorism wave. Does that qualify an Intifada of sort, Mr. Dimitri Diliani, or 30 seconds are on?
Even though I disagree with Mr. Lappin's definition of an Intifada, but most definitely whoever tries to predict when the Intifada is coming would be not as accurate in studying the Palestinian people's history and behavior. I believe this is an unpredictable action that will be taken by the people with no political guidance or any leadership to begin with. Leadership can join later.
The leaders leading the herd, or the herd leading the leaders? An everlasting question. Last but not least, Mr. Hananya, Naftali, your thoughts?
Look, I think that to the Palestinians, every day is Intifada. Every day is a day of rage. They have a problem with Jews living in Israel. They have a problem with me sitting here and breathing oxygen, because they hate us from, not all of them, but they hate us from the day they are born. It accompanies them in schools, religious teachings, universities, and homes. And while we do our best to save lives, they do their best to take lives. And frankly, I think that this is the bigger question, and the solution here starts with education. We need to educate them more for peace and not for conflict.
Okay, and on that note, we'll make a quick stop and cross now live to I-24 News correspondent Pia Stackelbach in Jerusalem, standing by for us at the Harnof neighborhood. Pia, we're several hours after those twin terror attacks. Things might seem, quote-unquote, back to normal, but nothing is normal about the situation, and the manhunt continues. What can you tell us?
Well, Ellie, this has definitely been a very difficult day for Jerusalem. These twin attacks happening today in the morning, the first one happening in the Givat Shaul neighborhood and only shortly after in the Ramot neighborhood. I'm right now standing next to the synagogue where earlier a commemoration ceremony has taken place for the victim of the first attack in Givat Shaul, for Ariel Shupak, a 16-year-old boy who was on his way on the bus to his yeshiva. Just like every morning, he later in the hospital succumbed to his wounds. In total, we have more than 20 people injured in these two attacks. More than 10 have been taken to Hadassah and Shaarei Tzedek hospitals in Jerusalem. A few of them are still hospitalized. Now, Ellie, it seems like this attack that we've seen today has been of a different nature. The last time that we have seen bus bombings was in 2016 in Hamas in Jerusalem, and Hamas back then have claimed responsibility for these attacks. Now, Israeli security forces say that although we have been seeing a tense period during recent months and weeks also, we have seen quite some lone wolf knife and stabbing attacks also here in the city. This attack has been a rather planned and organized one. Ellie, you have to remember the perpetrators managed to place a loaded charge at the two bus stations. They managed to detonate these explosives from afar without getting caught. This makes security forces believe that they were actually an organized network, and as you mentioned, the manhunt is underway, and police forces have been deployed increasingly in the city of Jerusalem today.
I-24 News correspondent Pia Stackelbach in Jerusalem for us. Thank you very much for this. Gentlemen, let's begin our conversation. Please feel free to interact from this point onwards. And let's begin from the irregularities or the unusual characteristics of the attacks we've seen today, as Pia illustrated. This is not part of the so-called lone wolf attack. Well-planned, well-orchestrated attack And let me ask you clearly, Yaakov Lappin, is it an Israeli intelligence failure?
I wouldn't describe it as a failure, but I would describe it as the organized terror cell that got through. And I think that we have to look at the wider context. According to figures that I've been able to confirm, since the start of this year, there have been 34 attempted bombings, very similar to what we saw this morning tragically in Jerusalem. 34 of those have been foiled. 330 shooting attacks have been foiled. So these are the kinds of numbers of attacks that are not getting through. And of course, because the terrorist threat is persistent, one is going to get through, and it is terrible. And it is something that the security forces will have to investigate, how the terrorists were able to get to West Jerusalem, how they were able to sneak their explosives across and then flee the scene. And this is the kind of reality that security forces have to deal with day in and day out.
But speaking of which, Hananya, Naftali, the use of explosives here, we haven't seen that in the past decade and a half or so. Does it mean that Iran is stepping up its grip here? Does it mean that the Palestinian grassroots movement are elevating the game? How should we read into that?
Well, I think that Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran, they always try to infiltrate these kind of events and sponsor it as they sponsor pretty much 99% of terrorism across the Middle East. But I think that the bigger question that our viewers should ask themselves is, because I served in the Israeli army, and almost every day our forces, our platoon would foil attacks whenever we were stationed in Judea and Samaria, and it was never on the news. But I do have to say that people should ask themselves, what inspires a young Palestinian men and women to go out and carry out an attack? Because we just seen earlier this month another devastating terrorist attack in which civilians are targeted. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they glorify it, and they love to say that they encourage attacks on Israeli forces. But at the end of the day, we see that civilians are the ones that are targeted only because they are Jews living in Israel. I think that that's just outrageous. Also, to see the silence that is coming out of the international forums that are always very quick to condemn Israel.
Yes, we have been hearing some international condemnation today, and this brings me to you, Mr. Dimitri Diliani. Islamic Jihad, Hamas, hailing the attack but not taking responsibility. Is the already fractured leadership of the Palestinians getting even more fractured? Who's calling the shots now?
Well, I'll tell you who's calling the shots. Who's calling the shots is the supremacist rhetoric, ignorant blurb, bigoted speech that has been given by people like Mr. Naftali, where his supremacist tone leaves no space for dialogue. It could be suitable for social media platform, but when you dialogue, you don't use these blurbs that are unworthy even the minimum respect, because they are just fake news and the creation of somebody's sick person's ideas and ideology. Now, having said that, I think that people like Mr. Naftali are the enemies of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, because raising that rhetoric, raising racism, dehumanizing the other side does not serve any purpose but escalation. You have to remember that today the Israelis have lost a young boy, and I am sorry that happened. But are you sorry that your soldiers, a couple of hours before that, shot and killed a 16-year-old boy in Nablus called Ahmad Shahadi? Probably did not even appear in the news. Do you know that a guy called Muhammad Abu Kishak, 22 years old, died from injuries suffered earlier today? You don't know that. So we have 2 people dying, over 40 injured in the past 24 hours just in Nablus alone. For you, an incident like what just happened today is something that would happen every few months. For us, it's an everyday, it's a living thing. It's an everyday thing. The Palestinian people that have died from gunshots, either by Israeli soldiers or Israeli settlers, terrorist settlers in the West Bank, has been 200. On the other side, there has been around 28 Israelis dead since the beginning of the year. But look at the gap. And trying to play the victim, given those statistics, given that you are illegally occupying our land, given that you own the weapons and we are just civilians, unarmed civilians, is just as pathetic and as racist as the supremacist
I would love to respond to that.
used by Mr. Naftali's speech here.
Mr. Naftali, Mr. Diliani, let's allow. Yeah.
Not with anybody else.
Yes, let's allow Mr. Naftali to respond, please.
I just have to quickly say that I'm very flattered that 80% of this amazing speech was directed at me. So I'll take that as a compliment. It means that what I'm doing really hurts and angers people who are against peace, because I have to say that, usually people that are quick to judge me, they don't really know me in person. And actually, I woke up this morning to a phone call that I got from a Palestinian from East Jerusalem, that he called me to say how sorry he was, and he told me that his heart and mind are with the Israeli nation. And I asked him a very simple question. I asked him, hey, what you said really touched my heart. Would you mind if I would post that for the world to see that Palestinians are good people that condemn terrorism? And his answer was very not surprising to me. He said that he is afraid for his life because the Palestinian society is teaching people to hate. And I'm not surprised that the guest here is also very quick to go against Israel, because he knows what will happen to him if he doesn't do it, because the Palestinian society does not welcome supporting peace and supporting eventually a solution. Because I have to say, an answer to me, if you have an answer. The Palestinians don't want peace with Israel. They want peace without Israel. Because what does it mean, free Palestine? Palestine is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. You want to cleanse the Jews. And then you tell us that we're occupiers. We cannot occupy what belongs to us. We've been here for 2,000 years, over 2,000 years. If you want to have this historical argument, we're going to win this. What we need to do is to find a solution, and that you are not doing.
Mr.
You're only
Diliani,
accusing, and that's shameful.
Let's allow Mr. Diliani to respond in the little time you have left.
Yeah, it's a very oversimplified, fear-mongering rhetoric that is used normally by racists and bigots all over the world, not just in Israel. And I can tell you something, by concluding that I'm anti-peace, I'm a non-violent activist that I've been arrested for peace activities that you probably haven't heard of because you are so ignorant. So I can tell you something, you're not only racist, but you're not too bright either.
Okay, on that note, gentlemen, we'll be taking a quick break and hopefully also a deep breath. And we will continue our discussion right after the break as we try and figure out what the next Israeli government can do, and can it do anything to change the reality on the ground. So Mr. Dimitri Diliani, Hananya Naftali, and Yaakov Lappin, you're staying with us. A quick break, and we're back with part 2. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Mr. Dimitri Diliani, Mr. Yaakov Lappin, and Mr. Hananya Naftali. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back to the conversation, let's take a listen to some of the remarks of Israeli Prime Minister-to-be Benjamin Netanyahu in the aftermath of those deadly attacks today.
I can say, and I think I express the feelings of many who, first of all, want to pray for the full recovery of all the injured, and there are also anxiety victims. I am convinced that the road will be successful and that they will make a full recovery. We still have, of course, a fight against brutal terrorism that raises its head again, and we will do everything to restore security to all Israeli citizens soon.
So let's get to it, gentlemen. Can the pending Benjamin Netanyahu government change anything? The reality on the ground, that is another quick fire round of 30 seconds each, and we pick up the conversation right after. Mr. Yaakov Lappin, please.
The government will not have any honeymoon or grace period. As soon as it's formed, it's going to have to deal with urgent questions. First of all, its policy about the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is fracturing. Its power is decreasing really by the week. And we're seeing that power vacuum play out in places like Jenin and Nablus. And regarding the second arena of Gaza, the government will have to make very quick decisions about whether it's going to continue the policies of the past government or not, which is essentially based on achieving stability and calm in exchange for economic
sticks and
humanitarian
carrots, so to
steps.
speak. Yeah. We'll put a stop right here and continue in a split second. Mr. Dimitri Diliani, your thoughts?
I believe that nothing is going to happen on the ground in terms of ending violence. I believe that things will escalate as long as there are ministers that come from fascist, pro-terrorism background. But this will give us as Palestinians a golden opportunity to expose the true nature of the racist, fascist right wing in the state of Israel.
And last but not least, Hananya Naftali, your take?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's very clear that the Israeli voters have spoken loud and clear that they do trust the next Netanyahu administration. But I believe that all Israeli leaders, they want peace and security for all the Israeli citizens. But the big question, the big debate is on how, because the left says that we need to use the approach of sticks and carrots, give them something they will lose, and the right says that doesn't work. We already have sticks and carrots, and they still don't care about it, and they promote the death penalty, which I'm very much in support of.
So let's engage in the conversation again, starting from this point exactly, Mr. Naftali. So what are we to expect? What will be the radical reform that will restore security, according to the right-wing vow?
Well, I have to say that I think that the big question, as I've said, and the big debate should really raise the alarm also internationally, because we see that these radicals, they still go out and carry out attacks. And obviously, with all the intelligence and the military, they're working around the clock to make sure that Israeli civilians are safe. But I just think that it's a crazy reality that from this studio, I'm going home and something might occur.
No, for sure.
I want to go.
For sure. But Israel criticizes the Palestinians when they're seeking international bids, such as the ICJ most recently. So let's leave the international community aside for a second. We do have a pending full-on right-wing government in the making here. What will be the change of policy?
That's a very interesting question. I think that what we need to do is to have a leadership that leads through strength and not through making concessions, because we saw that former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon made concessions and gave the Palestinians land, hoping that they will stop the terrorist activities. And, we are here. That happened in 2005, and we still have terrorism. So clearly, making concessions and compromising, giving them land does not work.
Okay.
Only strength.
Okay, we'll have to see what does that strength mean. Mr. Dimitri Diliani, I do want to ask you very clearly, from the Palestinian standpoint, does it really matter who is the sheriff in Jerusalem, if it's Benny Gantz or Benjamin Netanyahu or Yair Lapid? Will any leader get a kosher stamp from the Palestinians?
We don't use the term Jerusalem because Jerusalem is an occupied city, but yes, it does make a difference, does make a lot of difference. Netanyahu has been the champion of the post-Zionism era, and I think probably 2 consecutive terms of Netanyahu, we will be done with Zionism, and the only solution viable would
but
be
you're not too wary about the fate of Zionism. Let's be honest, Mr. Diliani. From the Palestinian standpoint, does it matter?
It's just propaganda. It's just propaganda.
Please, Mr. Diliani.
There's a difference between being concerned or do I care. No, I do not care much about Zionism, but does it concern me? Yes, because it does affect my everyday life. With the post-Zionism era that Netanyahu has been driving to achieve, we would only be having one-state solution that would be, at that time, easy to convince the world that this is the only viable solution, especially when you have ministers in the government that are for the death of Arab chants where their fans chant around them. And one of them, Ben-Gvir, actually participated in the commemoration of terrorist Meir.
So if I understand correctly, for you, Mr.
10
Diliani,
days ago, that was killed in New York 32 years ago.
for you, Mr. Diliani, as counterintuitive as it may sound, the further to the right an Israeli government is, the better. This is what I at least understand. Yaakov Lappin, when it comes to security, does the identity of the prime minister, of cabinet minister, really have an impact on the policy we're seeing on the ground?
Well, look, I think that, when you look at past governments where Netanyahu was in charge, there was a tendency for the defense establishment to make its recommendations, and more often than not, the cabinet would adopt those recommendations. And now within the coalition, there could be a very serious argument developing about whether that should continue, because there are forces in the coalition that want to change the status of the West Bank, of Judea and Samaria, and turn these territories into de facto parts of Israel. And it's not clear to me how Netanyahu will respond to that, because he has to deal with far wider considerations, foremost among them the alliance with the United States and the international community. And there could be a lot of tension within the coalition, despite its attempt to present a united front over these very issues. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of those tensions within the coalition itself.
And we're nearing the end of our debate, and I would like to address the same question to all of you. So please, if you can keep your answers short. Can the next terror attack be prevented, Mr. Diliani?
I don't think that anything can stop any attack, whether it was on Palestinian civilians, by Israeli soldiers and settlers, or by Palestinians against Israelis, as long as the politicians are not mature enough, and as long as they are racist supremacists, as Mr. Naftali on the scene.
Mr. Naftali, the floor is yours.
I think it's pretty laughable that he wants to lecture historic leaders with a lot of experience. But I just want to quickly refer to Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Diliani here is opposing Zionism, calls Israel an occupying apartheid state, and he's afraid of Benjamin Netanyahu raising to power. So I think that says it all. Benjamin Netanyahu is a leader that will lead Israel through strength, and that sows fear among those that hate Israel.
Yaakov Lappin, your concluding remarks?
To your original question,
yes,
certainly terrorist attacks can be prevented. Hundreds of them have been prevented over the past year, most of them by the Shin Bet, some of those through coordination with the Palestinian Authority, it has to be said. So, of course, they can be prevented. They will continue to be prevented as time goes by.
Yes, but the vicious cycle seems to keep on rolling. Mr. Hananya Naftali, Mr. Dimitri Diliani, Mr. Yaakov Lappin.
Conflict isn't ending anytime soon.
No, not in the near future, not in sight. Thank you so very much for your time and insight, gentlemen. We do appreciate it.